The convoy had moved out at dawn, the rising sun painting the desert sky with streaks of crimson and gold. For the 542 Marines of Echo Battalion, the march forward was supposed to be routine, a sweep and secure mission into hostile territory, followed by relief forces that would arrive within 48 hours. They carried themselves with the confidence of trained men who had drilled for months, perhaps years, for this exact kind of operation. They were told they'd face resistance, yes, but nothing they couldn't handle. In those early hours, morale was high. Some Marines even joked as they advanced, adjusting the weight of their packs and rifles. Private Daniels, barely 19, muttered to his buddy, "They said it's just a sweep, like mowing the lawn." His friend chuckled nervously, but the sergeant ahead barked, "Eyes forward, Daniels. This isn't lawn care. It's war." The words drew a round of quiet laughs, but they carried an edge of truth. The first contact came sooner than expected. From the hills overlooking their path, enemy fighters opened fire, raining bullets and mortar. The Marines reacted with precision, forming defensive positions, returning controlled fire. They pushed back the assault, sustaining only a handful of casualties. To them, it felt like confirmation of the mission briefing. Dangerous, yes, but manageable. When the last echoes of gunfire died away, they pressed forward with renewed determination. But what they didn't know was that the ambush was only the beginning. By the second night, the terrain had changed. Jagged mountains hemmed them in, and narrow passes forced them to move single file. Every sound seemed magnified, the crunch of boots on gravel, the clink of gear, the distant howl of wind. The enemy was no longer shadowy figures on the ridgeline. They were everywhere, unseen but always present. Shots would ring out from the darkness, then vanish. IEDs exploded beneath vehicles, leaving twisted metal and black smoke in their wake. Each explosion tore holes, not just in the earth, but in the Marines' confidence. Radio calls back to command grew increasingly urgent. "We're taking heavier fire than expected." Requesting immediate reinforcement, officers reported. The reply came hours later, flat and unshaken. "Hold position. Reinforcements en route." So they held. Day 3 bled into Day 4, and the promised reinforcements never arrived. Supplies that had seemed abundant at the start now ran thin. Rations were halved, then quartered. Water became more precious than ammunition. The medics worked frantically, turning shirts into tourniquets, helmets into makeshift basins, and morphine into liquid gold. Wounded Marines groaned in pain, yet many refused evacuation when helicopters briefly appeared overhead, choosing instead to stay with their brothers. Each night was worse than the last. The enemy attacked in waves, testing defenses, probing for weaknesses. Mortar rounds lit up the sky, their flashes briefly revealing the exhausted faces of Marines who had long since stopped joking. No one spoke of victory anymore. They spoke only of survival. Corporal Reyes, a veteran of 2 tours, pulled his squad close one evening as they crouched in the ruins of a shattered village house. "Listen," he said, voice steady but eyes hard. "Headquarters says help's coming. But if you ask me, we're on our own. So we fight smart. We fight together, and nobody breaks. Got it?" They nodded, though deep inside, they all felt the same gnawing dread. Command's words were starting to sound like empty promises. By Day 6, morale was crumbling. Ammunition belts had been stripped clean. Rifles were down to their last magazines. Food was gone entirely. Some Marines chewed on coffee grounds. Others licked condensation off metal to stave off thirst. The bodies of fallen comrades lay covered under tarps, waiting for a proper burial that might never come. The battalion was running on fumes, physical, mental, and spiritual. The radios still worked, but the voices from command had grown colder, more distant. Continue to hold position. Reinforcements are delayed. The phrase delayed echoed like a cruel joke. Every man knew the truth. They had been abandoned. And yet, they fought. When the enemy surged again on day 7, Marines who could barely stand found the strength to fire their rifles. They passed weapons down the line when their own went empty. They hauled the wounded back from the front lines, refusing to leave anyone behind. For every Marine killed, another shouted in defiance, keeping the line intact. Inside their hearts, despair whispered. But so did duty. Private Daniels, once the joker of the squad, now sat silent, his uniform blackened with soot and blood. He clutched his rifle like a lifeline, eyes hollow yet burning with determination. "If we're going down," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, "we're going down as Marines." On the morning of day 8, the battalion was nearly broken. Their defensive perimeter was little more than rubble. Wounded outnumbered the able. The air stank of gunpowder, sweat, and death. They were ghosts in uniform, holding ground that had long since lost meaning. Captain Harris, the battalion commander, gathered what remained of his men in the ruined courtyard. His face was gaunt, his voice hoarse. "Listen to me," he said. "Headquarters may have forgotten us, but we will not forget who we are. We are Marines. We will fight until there is nothing left. And if this is where we fall, then we fall together." The words struck deep. For the first time in days, some Marines straightened their backs, gripping their weapons tighter. They might die here, yes, but they would not die without honor. What none of them knew was that far away, at the forward base, a young pilot named Sarah Mitchell was listening. And as she heard their final transmissions, she felt something no one else seemed to feel anymore. The burning conviction that those 542 lives were worth saving, no matter the cost. The 9th day dawned with smoke already rising on the horizon. The Marines of Echo Battalion had lost track of time, their days blending into nights, nights into endless firefights. Their position, once a cautiously chosen defensive pocket, had become a cage. The enemy surrounded them on all sides, pressing closer with each passing hour. What had started as a mission of confidence had devolved into a siege of desperation. The men moved like shadows now, hollow-eyed, their uniforms stained with grime and blood. They had become gaunt, weathered figures, their faces aged beyond their years. Yet despite the exhaustion, there was no collapse of order. Squads rotated to the front lines, others dug deeper trenches, some carried water, if any could be found. A rhythm of survival pulsed through the battalion. Fight, hold, endure. But beneath the order lay a truth everyone felt, but dared not say. They were being erased. Not just forgotten by their command, but erased from existence. If they fell here, no rescue would come. No recognition would follow. They would vanish into the dirt and be spoken of only in whispers, a footnote in a war that had already consumed too much. Corporal Reyes crouched behind a broken wall, his rifle braced on a crumbling window frame. His squad huddled around him, mud-caked and shivering in the chill of the dawn. He scanned the hills, spotting movement in the distance. Contact. 2 o'clock. Small arms. His voice was steady, though inside he was fraying. The squad braced. Shots cracked out, whizzing through the air. The enemy pressed from the ridgeline, firing in bursts. The Marines returned fire, conserving every round. When their magazines clicked empty, hands reached down the line, passing what little ammunition remained. There was no shouting, no panic, only grim focus. When the attack broke off after 30 minutes, the Marines slumped into cover, panting, sweat streaking down soot-stained faces. Private Daniels, who had once joked about mowing lawns, now stared blankly at the dirt. His lips were cracked, his hands trembling from hunger. Reyes knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. "Stay sharp, Daniels. We're not dead yet." Daniels nodded, though his eyes betrayed his thoughts. Not yet, but soon. The medics worked in silence. They had no morphine left, no proper bandages, no antibiotics. What they had were rags, strips of clothing, and sheer will. Men with shattered legs clenched their teeth while their wounds were bound in silence. Those with gut wounds whispered prayers, their breaths shallow, their futures already slipping away. Sergeant Mason, one of the older Marines, sat beside a wounded private whose chest rose and fell in ragged gasps. Mason held the boy's hand, whispering, "You're not alone, son. You're not alone." The boy's eyes fluttered shut moments later, and Mason sat there in the dust, still holding his hand long after the life had left it. They buried the dead at night, quietly, using helmets as shovels. The graves were shallow, marked only by rifles stuck into the ground. The living bowed their heads briefly before returning to their posts. There was no time for mourning. Dawn always brought another attack. By the 12th day, the battalion was a skeleton of itself. Their perimeter had shrunk, a shrinking circle of rubble and broken walls. They called it the Pit, a grim name for the ground they refused to surrender. Still, Command's voice crackled through the radio with the same hollow words. "Hold position. Reinforcements are delayed." Captain Harris, gaunt and weary, gathered his officers around a flickering lantern. Maps lay spread across a crate, the edges torn and burned. "We can't keep this up much longer," one lieutenant said. "We're bleeding out. Ammunition's almost gone." Harris looked each man in the eye. "Orders are to hold, and hold we will. These Marines trust us not to break. If we go, they go. So we keep standing. Understood?" They nodded, though none truly believed help was coming. Still, they would not abandon the men under their command. The attacks intensified. Mortar shells screamed overhead, collapsing walls, spraying dirt and shrapnel. Men were hurled from cover, limbs torn, ears ringing. Yet each time the dust settled, the Marines dragged themselves back to the line. Bloodied, battered, but unbroken. Reyes was hit in the arm, the bullet tearing muscle. He wrapped it himself with a strip of cloth, refusing to leave his squad. Daniels carried ammunition to the front, stumbling under the weight, his lips whispering a mantra. No man left behind. No man left behind. On the 13th night, the enemy stormed the pit in waves. Marines fired until their barrels smoked, then fought with knives, entrenching tools, even bare fists. The air was chaos, screams, explosions, the stench of burning powder and flesh. By dawn, the ground was littered with bodies, but the Marines were still there. Bruised, bloodied, but still there. In rare moments of quiet, some men wrote letters home, though they knew they might never be sent. Daniels scribbled on a torn scrap of paper, "Mom, I'm sorry. I wanted to make you proud. If I don't come back, know that I fought for my brothers. We fought together." He folded it carefully and tucked it in his vest, as though someone someday would find it. Others prayed. Some stared silently at the horizon, waiting for reinforcements that never came. A few cursed command, spitting in the dirt, vowing that if they lived through this, they would never forgive. But despite the despair, a strange unity had taken hold. Stripped of hope, stripped of supplies, they clung only to each other. Marines fought not for medals or orders, but for the man beside them. That bond became their anchor. On the 15th day, Captain Harris walked the perimeter, passing each position. He placed a hand on shoulders, met eyes with his men. "You're not forgotten," he told them, though deep down, he feared they were. "You're Marines. And Marines don't quit, ever." His words carried weight, Not because the men believed in command, but because they believed in him. They believed in each other. And so, they held 1 hour at a time, 1 bullet at a time, 1 breath at a time. The battalion had become a ghost force, barely alive, but still refusing to die. And as the 16th day rose, with the enemy preparing yet another assault, none of them knew that far away, someone had finally decided to disobey the silence of command. Someone who would risk everything to save them. The radios were their lifeline. Each night, when the gunfire finally ebbed and the wounded were gathered into makeshift shelters, the Marines waited for that scratchy, distant voice to break through the static. Orders, encouragement, the promise of reinforcements, anything at all. But more often than not, what came was silence. When a voice did arrive, it was measured, clinical, almost indifferent. Echo Battalion, this is forward command. Situation acknowledged. Reinforcements delayed. Hold position. Repeat, hold position. Those words, once a beacon of discipline, had become poison. Hold position no longer sounded like strategy. It sounded like abandonment. Back at the forward operating base, hundreds of miles away, the tension was equally suffocating. Pilots, ground crews, and junior officers gathered around radios, listening to the transmissions pouring in from the trapped Marines. The reports were devastating. Dwindling ammunition, rising casualties, relentless enemy fire. Captain Doyle, a veteran helicopter pilot, slammed his fist against the map table after hearing yet another plea for resupply. We could be there in 30 minutes. 30 damn minutes, and we could drop them ammo, water, med kits. But no, command says it's too risky. Across from him, Lieutenant Parker shifted uneasily. They're not wrong, Doyle. The airspace is crawling with anti-aircraft batteries. We'd be flying straight into a meat grinder. You want to load up a bird with supplies and crew just to see it blown out of the sky? Doyle glared. I'd rather die trying to help them than sit here and listen to them die alone. In the command center, senior officers pored over maps, charts, and intelligence reports. The mood was detached, bureaucratic. To them, Echo Battalion was a red marker on a map, a lost position, surrounded by superior forces, impossible to extract without catastrophic losses. Gentlemen, Colonel Matthews said, his tone icy, we must consider resource allocation. We cannot risk high-value aircraft or personnel for an operation with near-zero probability of success. The battalion has served its purpose holding that ground. Their sacrifice is not in vain. The words hung in the air, chilling everyone who heard them. Sacrifice. A convenient term that meant 542 Marines had already been written off as dead. The younger pilots whispered in frustration. They spoke of mutiny, of defying orders, of flying out under the cover of night. But the consequences loomed large. Disobeying a direct order in wartime was career suicide, sometimes even punishable by court-martial. Their families, their futures, everything they had worked for hung in the balance. And so, they stayed grounded, forced to listen to the endless cries over the radio. Echo Battalion to forward command. Ammunition critically low. Request immediate resupply. Echo Battalion to forward command. We have over 200 wounded, situation dire. Do you copy? Echo Battalion to forward command. Please don't leave us here. The replies were always the same. Hold position. Reinforcements delayed. Back in the pit, the Marines recognized the truth even before anyone spoke it aloud. They had been abandoned. The tone of command's voice carried no urgency, no humanity. Just protocol. Private Daniels, his face hollow with hunger, spat into the dirt after the last transmission. They're not coming, he muttered. They've left us here to die. Corporal Reyes put a hand on his shoulder, forcing him to meet his eyes. Maybe, maybe not. But we're still breathing, aren't we? Until we're not, we fight. Nearby, Sergeant Mason overheard and added, "We don't fight for them. We fight for us. For the man next to you. That's the only command that matters now." The enemy knew reinforcements weren't coming, too. Their assaults grew bolder, their propaganda louder. Leaflets fluttered into the pit during the night, dropped from drones. The messages were taunts, written in broken English. "Your commanders have left you. Surrender and live." The Marines used the leaflets as kindling to light small fires, their only warmth in the freezing nights. No one surrendered. Not because they believed in command, but because they believed in each other. Meanwhile, at the base, Captain Sarah Mitchell sat alone in the flight hangar, staring at her helicopter. She had flown it through storms, dust clouds, and enemy fire before. She knew what it could handle, and she knew what she could handle. But more than that, she knew what she couldn't handle. The sound of 542 Marines being erased from existence while she did nothing. Mitchell had heard every transmission, her heart breaking with each desperate plea. She saw the younger Marines in her mind, the ones barely out of high school, calling for help that would never come. She saw their faces not as soldiers on a map, but as brothers, sons, husbands. She clenched her fists. They don't need silence. They need us. Her fellow pilots warned her against reckless talk. "Don't even think about it, Sarah," one said. "You take that bird out there without orders, and you're finished. They'll strip your wings, maybe worse." She looked him in the eye. "And what about them? What's happening to their wings, their lives, their families, while we sit here waiting for orders that'll never come?" No one answered, because deep down, they all knew she was right. Back in the pit, the 16th day closed with another brutal assault. Marines fought hand to hand in the dark, bayonets clashing, bodies colliding in the dust. When the enemy retreated, the pit was silent except for the moans of the wounded. Captain Harris, his voice hoarse, spoke to his officers. "They're thinning us out. One attack at a time. If help doesn't come soon." He stopped, unable to finish. The men around him didn't need the words. They all knew what was coming. The radio crackled one last time that night. Command's voice, cold as ever, repeated, "Hold position." Reinforcements delayed. For the Marines, it was confirmation of what they already knew. Silence was their only reply. For Captain Sarah Mitchell, listening from the hangar, it was the breaking point. The hangar smelled of oil, steel, and dust, the familiar perfume of war. Helicopters stood in neat lines, hulking beasts resting on their wheels, silent yet always ready to roar. Among them was a single bird Mitchell knew better than she knew herself. She called it Iron Angel. Its fuselage bore scars from missions past, patched holes from shrapnel, faded paint where the sun had beaten down. But like her, the machine endured. Captain Sarah Mitchell sat on a crate, helmet in her hands, staring at the helicopter as though it were a mirror of her own soul. Outside, the desert night was still, broken only by the distant thrum of artillery. Somewhere beyond those ridges, 542 Marines clung to life. She had listened to their voices every day, every night, each plea cutting deeper into her conscience. Hold position. Reinforcements delayed. The words replayed in her mind like a curse. Sarah had never been the kind of officer who fit neatly into military molds. She wasn't the loudest, the toughest, or the most decorated. But she had something else, an iron conviction that people mattered more than protocols. Raised in a small Midwest town, she had grown up the daughter of a mechanic. While other kids spent summers at pools or malls, Sarah was in the garage, handing her father wrenches, learning the difference between a bolt and a bearing. Machines, she learned, could always be fixed. People, on the other hand, People had to be saved before it was too late. That belief had carried her through flight school, through the skepticism of peers who thought a woman had no place in combat aviation, through missions that pushed her to the edge of endurance. Now, it was the only thing she had left. The Marine's transmissions echoed in her head, the quiet desperation, the prayers, the fading hope. She could picture them, boys and men, filthy, wounded, hungry, huddled in rubble. She could imagine their mothers' faces, waiting for sons who might never come home. And she asked herself the question Command refused to. If not me, then who? Her squadron mates tried to talk her down. "You can't be serious, Sarah," Captain Doyle said, blocking her path as she checked over her gear. "You take that bird up, you'll never fly again. Best case, they ground you for life. Worst case, you don't come back." Mitchell zipped her vest, tightening the straps. "And what about them, Doyle? You think they've got a best case? They're running on empty out there." He swore under his breath. "Orders are orders. You break them, you're not a hero. You're a criminal." She looked him dead in the eye. "If saving 542 lives makes me a criminal, then lock me up when I get back. But I'll be damned if I sit here and let them die." The hangar went quiet. A few younger pilots glanced her way, eyes wide with a mix of fear and admiration. Some wanted to join her, she could tell, but the weight of protocol chained them. Sarah had always been willing to carry burdens others wouldn't. This would be no different. That night, Sarah sat in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marines' faces pressed into the dirt, bloodied hands clawing at radios, voices fading. She heard the silence of command. She thought of her father. Years ago, when she had first told him she wanted to fly, he'd laughed, not because he doubted her, but because he understood the fire inside her. "Don't do it halfway, Sarah," he'd said. "If you're going to risk your life for something, you give it everything you've got. No hesitation. No regret." The memory tightened her chest. She rolled onto her side, whispering into the darkness. No hesitation. No regret. At 0400 hours, she made her decision. The pre-dawn air was cold when she stepped into the hangar. No alarms blared, no officers blocked her way. The base was quiet, most of the personnel still asleep. The helicopter loomed in the dim light, waiting. Sarah moved with practiced precision. Pre-flight checks, fuel levels, rotor inspections, muscle memory guided her hands. She whispered to the machine like an old friend. "You and me, Angel. One more ride. Let's bring them home." Her hands trembled not with fear, but with adrenaline. She knew the risks. The anti-aircraft fire, the overloaded bird, the possibility that she'd never make it back. But the thought of doing nothing was worse. As she climbed into the cockpit, a voice stopped her. "You're really doing this?" It was Doyle, standing in the doorway. His face was pale, conflicted. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Finally, he said, "God help you, Sarah." She smiled faintly. God help them. The engines roared to life, echoing across the desert. Lights flickered on in the barracks. Men stirred, officers shouted, but by the time anyone realized what was happening, Mitchell was already lifting off. The ground shrank beneath her as the helicopter climbed into the night. The base faded into a cluster of glowing dots, then disappeared entirely. Ahead lay mountains, valleys, and death. She flew low, hugging the earth, weaving through canyons to avoid radar. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady on the controls. Over the radio, angry voices crackled. "Mitchell, return to base immediately." "That is a direct order." She flipped the switch off. Silence filled her helmet, broken only by the thrum of rotors. For the first time in days, she felt peace. The path was clear. She was going to them. In the pit, the Marines crouched in their rubble fortress, preparing for another assault. Exhaustion hung over them like a shroud. Daniel sat with his back against a wall, staring blankly at the sky. "We're ghosts already," he muttered. Then, faint at first, a sound drifted through the air, the rhythmic beat of rotor blades. Marines froze, ears straining. Was it real, or just a cruel trick of imagination? The sound grew louder. Daniel shot to his feet, eyes wide. "Holy, that's a chopper!" Men scrambled to their feet, staring upward. And then, through the smoke and haze, they saw it. A lone helicopter, descending fast, slicing through the morning sky like an avenging angel. Their radios crackled with a voice they hadn't heard before. Calm, steady, female. "Echo Battalion, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell. Hold tight, boys. I'm coming for you." For the first time in 16 days, hope roared louder than gunfire. The desert sky blushed with the first hints of dawn, streaks of red and gold breaking across the horizon. But the beauty of morning meant nothing here. It was a predator's light, revealing everything, offering no shadows to hide in. For Captain Sarah Mitchell, the glow only sharpened the risk. Daylight meant visibility, and visibility meant death. Her helicopter, the Iron Angel, thundered low across jagged ridges, the rotors biting into thin mountain air. The ground raced beneath her in blurred streaks of sand and stone. She flew without backup, without authorization, without hope of mercy if she returned. The only thing she carried was her conviction, and the 542 lives waiting for her arrival. "Angel to Echo Battalion," she called into the radio. Her voice was calm, deliberate, steady, a mask over the fire in her veins. "I'm 5 clicks out. Smoke me when I'm close." On the other end came static, then a ragged male voice, weak but alive. "God, is this real? You're actually coming?" "Damn right I am," Mitchell replied. "Light your flares when you hear me. And get ready. We're leaving one way or another." The channel erupted in cheers and disbelief. After 16 days of silence and death, hope sounded foreign to them. Back at base, command was in chaos. Radios screeched, officers barked into headsets, satellites tracked the lone helicopter streaking toward enemy lines. "Mitchell's gone rogue," an operations officer shouted. "She's entering hostile airspace alone." "Bring her back," the commander snarled. "Scramble intercept." "I don't care how. She doesn't make that landing." But Sarah Mitchell had already cut them out. No more orders. No more waiting. The chain of command had snapped, and with it, the leash around her conscience. The first tracers lit up the sky as she crested the ridge. Bullets streaked upward like angry fireflies, glowing red and green in the dawn light. Mitchell yanked the stick, tilting hard to the left. The Iron Angel groaned, metal screaming, but she held steady. Her eyes locked on the coordinates the Marines had given her. "Come on, come on," she muttered, teeth gritted. Below, the valley erupted with muzzle flashes. Enemy fighters swarmed like ants from their burrows, scrambling into position. RPGs whooshed into the air, streaking toward her. Sarah's hands moved faster than thought, diving, banking, juking through smoke trails. Explosions tore open the desert floor where she had been seconds earlier. Inside the pit, the Marines scrambled as dust and debris rained down. Sergeant Daniels clutched the radio, shouting over the chaos. "She's here. She's actually here." His men lit red smoke flares, the signal climbing in a desperate pillar through the haze. Mitchell spotted it. Her heart lurched. There, the pit, a scar of rubble and broken stone, ringed by enemy fire. Tiny figures waved frantically below, their smoke a blood-red beacon. "Echo Battalion, I see you," she said. Her voice, calm and unwavering, cut through the cacophony. "Hold your ground. I'm coming in hot." The descent was madness. Every warning light on the console screamed at her. Altitude too low, engine strain, missile lock detected. She ignored them all. She had one mission. Gunfire rattled against the fuselage, each impact like a hammer blow. Sparks flew across the cockpit. A round cracked the glass, splintering it into a spiderweb. Mitchell didn't flinch. She gripped the stick tighter, fighting the vibration threatening to tear her machine apart. "Stay with me, Angel," she whispered to the bird. Just a little longer. She dove straight into the valley, the helicopter weaving between streams of tracer fire. She could see their faces now, filthy, gaunt, eyes wide with disbelief. Some cheered, some prayed, some just stared in stunned silence. The landing zone was suicide. No flat ground, just rubble and craters, with insurgents encircling from every angle. But hesitation wasn't in her vocabulary. She dropped the bird into the pit, wheels grinding against broken stone. The rotors kicked up a storm of dust and smoke, shrouding everything in chaos. "Go, go, go!" Daniels bellowed, dragging men toward the chopper. Inside the pit, it was pandemonium. Marines hobbled on wounded legs. Others carried comrades on shoulders. Every man left alive surged toward the helicopter. A lifeline materialized from the heavens. But the enemy didn't relent. Gunfire ripped through the haze, cutting men down mid-sprint. Mitchell saw it all through the cockpit glass, a Marine collapsing yards from the ramp, another dragging him through the dirt, while rounds tore into the ground around them. Mitchell slammed her hand onto the side-mounted M240 machine gun. With one hand on the controls, she squeezed the trigger. The helicopter roared, spitting fire into the ridges. Enemy fighters fell, their gun lines shattered by her onslaught. "Move, damn it!" she shouted into the radio. "Every second counts." Daniels reached the ramp, shoving men inside, blood streaking his face. "How many can you take?" He yelled over the roar. "As many as fit," she snapped back. The Marines piled in, cramming shoulder to shoulder, some collapsing the moment they crossed the threshold. Wounded were dragged aboard, rifles clattered to the floor, men screamed for brothers still outside. Mitchell kept one hand steady on the stick, the other squeezing bursts of gunfire into enemy positions. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes, but she didn't waver. The helicopter groaned under the growing weight. Warning lights flared again. Overload, overload, overload. Still they came. 50 men. 100. 150. The Iron Angels sagged lower, rotors straining, but Mitchell refused to cut them off. Every face that made it inside was another ghost saved from becoming a statistic. Bullets chewed through the ramp. A Marine screamed, clutching his shoulder. Blood pooled onto the metal floor. Another dropped beside him, dead before he hit. Daniels roared for medics, dragging them deeper inside. Still they came. From the ridges, the enemy unleashed a fresh volley. RPGs streaked downward, one exploding so close the helicopter rocked sideways, nearly tipping. The Marines inside screamed, clutching at the walls. Mitchell yanked the bird upright, cursing through clenched teeth. "Hold together, damn you!" She shouted at her machine. The radio crackled again. It was command. "Mitchell, abort immediately. You're overloaded. You'll never clear the valley." "That's a direct order." She switched it off. Again, her eyes hardened. No hesitation. No regret. When the cabin was bursting, Marines pressed shoulder to shoulder, the wounded stacked on laps and in aisles. Mitchell knew she had no more seconds left. If she lingered, they would all die here. "Daniels!" She shouted into the intercom. "Ramp up, we're out of time." But there's still. Ramp up, Sergeant. The hydraulic ramp groaned shut, sealing the bird's belly. The Marines inside pounded their rifles against the walls, screaming defiance into the roar. Mitchell shoved the throttle. The Iron Angel strained, engines shrieking, rotors clawing at the thin mountain air. For a heartbeat, it felt like the helicopter was pinned to the earth, shackled by the sheer weight of humanity inside. Then, inch by inch, it lifted. Dust and smoke swirled beneath them. Enemy fire tore upward, chasing their ascent. Mitchell zigzagged through the storm, every nerve on fire, every muscle screaming with focus. She flew like a demon possessed, weaving through tracer lines, dodging missile locks by sheer instinct. And then, with one final surge, the bird cleared the ridge. Inside the cabin, 200 exhausted, broken men erupted into a roar. They pounded the walls, clapped shoulders, some wept openly. Hope, once lost, now surged in their veins. At the controls, Mitchell's jaw tightened. She knew this was only the first load. Hundreds more still waited in the pit. And she would come back for them, again and again, until every last Marine was out. For now, she allowed herself a single breath of relief. Her gamble had paid off. Against orders, against reason, against every law of protocol, she had done the impossible. And deep down, Sarah Mitchell knew this was only the beginning. The Iron Angel crested the ridge with a wounded groan, her rotors shrieking in protest. Inside, nearly 200 Marines clung to one another, pressed shoulder to shoulder, their faces pale and hollow-eyed. Some prayed, some cursed, some sat in silence, staring at the woman in the cockpit who had defied the impossible to lift them out of hell. Sarah Mitchell's hands never left the controls, her eyes locked on the horizon. The valley behind them still smoked with gunfire and blood. Her ears still rang with the shouts of men left behind, the ones who hadn't fit inside her overloaded bird. Each voice was a blade in her chest. This wasn't victory. Not yet. This was only the first step. They touched down at the forward operating base in a storm of dust and chaos. Medics rushed the ramp, dragging out the wounded, shouting for stretchers. Officers swarmed, shouting questions, demanding answers, faces red with fury. "Mitchell, what the hell have you done?" One colonel bellowed, storming toward her as she pulled off her helmet. Sarah's face was streaked with sweat and grime. Her eyes burned red from smoke, but her voice was calm, cutting through the noise like a blade. "I've brought them back," she said simply. The colonel's face darkened. "You're grounded." Effective immediately. But before he could continue, Daniel stumbled from the helicopter, his uniform soaked in blood, not all of it his own. He glared at the colonel, his voice hoarse but booming. "Ground her? Are you insane? She just pulled 200 of us out of a grave you left us in." The Marines, still strong enough to stand, shouted their agreement, voices cracking with gratitude and rage. Their cheers drowned out the colonel's protests. In that moment, command lost control of the narrative. Mitchell wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was their savior. Sarah didn't wait for orders or threats. She turned back to her bird, running her hands over its battered fuselage. Holes pocked the frame. Hydraulic lines leaked. Warning lights blinked like angry eyes. The Iron Angel was on the edge of collapse. But it could still fly. And that was all she needed. Less than 30 minutes later, against every regulation and threat, Mitchell lifted off again. This time, she carried only ammunition and fuel. "Echo Battalion," she called into the radio. "I'm on my way back. Light me up." The response was instant, a chorus of relief and disbelief. Daniel's voice came through strongest. "I told them you'd come back." "I told them?" The second descent was worse than the first. The insurgents had regrouped, furious that their prey had been snatched away. Anti-aircraft fire laced the sky, RPGs streaking upward like arrows from hell. The valley burned with rage. But Mitchell was ready. She flew lower, faster, weaving through canyons, skimming so close to the ground that her rotors kicked up walls of dust. Every instinct screamed this was suicide. Every warning light blazed. But her hands were steady, her eyes sharp. She wasn't flying a helicopter anymore. She was wielding it like a weapon. The Marines in the pit heard her before they saw her. That rhythmic thunder of blades, that sound that had become hope itself. Men who could barely lift their rifles staggered to their feet, screaming with joy. Red smoke flares lit the air, painting the valley like a wound. She came in hard, skidding into the crater in a cloud of dust and fire. The ramp dropped before the skids even touched ground. Go, go, go. She shouted, unleashing suppressive fire from the side gun. This time, the enemy was waiting. Bullets tore into the pit from three sides. Marines fell even as they ran for the ramp. Mitchell's gun sang back, mowing down lines of fighters. Blood misted the air. Screams drowned in the roar of engines. Inside the helicopter, men dragged the wounded aboard, piling bodies like cordwood. There was no time for order, no time for anything but raw survival. Mitchell, we're overloading again. Daniels shouted, trying to push men deeper into the cabin. Then overload me. She snapped, emptying another belt of ammo into the ridgeline. The Iron Angel rocked under the strain, but Sarah didn't relent. One by one, men piled in until the bird sagged dangerously low, almost tipping. Finally, with no more seconds to steal, she yanked the throttle. The helicopter clawed into the sky, dragging itself upward with sheer stubbornness. Enemy fire chased them, RPGs streaking past, explosions buffeting the hull. Marines screamed prayers, clutching their helmets. Mitchell's face was stone. She juked through fire, weaving a path no sane pilot would attempt. And then, once more, they cleared the ridge. She returned again, and again. 3 runs. 4 runs. 5. Each time, she left command behind, cutting off their furious orders. Each time, she dodged death with skill and sheer defiance. Each time, she brought back another load of broken, bloodied men who never should have lived to see the sun. By the 6th run, her body ached with exhaustion. Her arms felt like lead, her eyes burned with sand and smoke. The helicopter rattled with every mile, each new hole in the fuselage a wound to her own flesh. But still, she pressed on. By the 7th run, even the enemy seemed to falter. They fired less, their volleys scattered, as if in disbelief that she kept coming. To them, it must have seemed like madness, a phantom woman in a dying bird, pulling men from their grasp again and again. But to the Marines, it was salvation. On the final run, silence fell as the last of the Marines climbed aboard. Daniels was the last man out, staggering up the ramp, his face streaked with dirt and blood. He turned back one final time, staring at the pit that had been their tomb for 16 days. Then he slapped the wall and shouted, "We're all here. Take us home." Mitchell's throat tightened. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small smile. She pulled the throttle, the Iron Angel rising one final time from the valley of death. The flight back was quiet. The Marines were too exhausted to cheer. Some slept sitting upright, others leaned against one another, their bodies swaying with the vibrations. A few simply stared at Mitchell, silent tears streaking their faces. For them, she wasn't just a pilot. She wasn't just a rule breaker. She was the reason they were still breathing. When the helicopter touched down at base, silence gave way to thunder. Hundreds of Marines stumbled out, collapsing into Medic's arms. Those still standing raised their rifles in salute, their hoarse voices crying her name. Mitchell sat in the cockpit, staring at the blinking console, at the countless warning lights, at the smoke curling from the engines. The Iron Angel had done the impossible. And so had she. It wasn't medals or glory, or even history that filled Sarah Mitchell's heart in that moment. It was something simpler, purer. The knowledge that 542 Marines, every last one of them, were alive because she refused to obey. She had broken protocol, and in doing so, she had defined what it meant to lead. The base was chaos when the Iron Angel touched down for the last time. Engines coughed smoke, hydraulics bled oil, and the fuselage sagged like a warrior who had survived too many battles. Yet the bird had carried them home. One by one, Marines stumbled off the ramp, their boots striking dirt they thought they'd never see again. Some collapsed into waiting arms, some limped toward medics, and some dropped to their knees, kissing the ground. The air was filled with shouts, cries, and the buzzing frenzy of triage. Stretchers rolled in every direction. Blood-stained uniforms and gurneys. Medics barked orders. Helicopter crews rushed to refuel and restock. But amid the storm, a single thread of clarity ran through every survivor. Captain Sarah Mitchell had brought them back. She sat in the cockpit, helmet resting on her lap, eyes distant. The weight of 16 days, of 7 impossible flights, of every man saved and every bullet dodged, pressed down on her shoulders. For the first time since she lifted off against orders, the adrenaline drained from her veins, leaving exhaustion in its place. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. The human body was only meant to carry so much. A knock on the cockpit window jolted her. Sergeant Daniels stood there, face gaunt, arm bandaged, but alive. When she opened the hatch, he pulled himself up with one good hand and leaned into the cockpit. "You didn't just save us," he rasped, voice thick with emotion. "You brought us back from the dead." Mitchell managed a tired smile. "You boys did the hard part. You held out." Daniels shook his head. "We held out because you gave us a reason. Don't let anyone tell you different." The celebration of survival lasted only hours before command reasserted its grip. By nightfall, Mitchell was summoned to headquarters. The tent was dim, filled with senior officers whose faces carried no trace of gratitude. "Captain Mitchell," the commanding general said. His voice clipped. "You stand accused of gross insubordination, violation of direct orders, reckless endangerment of military equipment, and dereliction of duty." The words hit like bullets. But Mitchell stood at attention, her uniform still stained with the dust of battle. "With respect, sir, I saved 542 Marines from annihilation. That is not the issue here," the general snapped. "You disobeyed the chain of command. You undermined operational control. You risked not only your life but a multi-million-dollar aircraft. The fact you succeeded does not erase the fact you broke protocol." Mitchell's jaw tightened. Her heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "Sir, if following protocol means letting hundreds of Marines die, then protocol is broken." The tent erupted in murmurs. One colonel slammed his fist against the table. "This is the military, Captain. Discipline is the spine of our existence. Without it, we are chaos." Mitchell met his glare. "And without humanity, we are machines." For a moment, silence held. The general leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You'll be confined to quarters until further notice. A full court-martial will determine your fate." Word spread like wildfire. By the next morning, every corner of the base buzzed with the story. Men whispered in mess halls. Pilots exchanged glances in hangars. Medics paused in their work to murmur Mitchell's name. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a myth in the making. When Daniels and his men regained enough strength, they marched to headquarters as a unit, bandaged, limping, but united. 542 survivors stood in front of the general's tent, rifles slung, uniforms torn, faces gaunt but defiant. Daniels stepped forward, his voice hoarse yet unyielding. "Sir, if you court-martial Captain Mitchell, you'll have to explain to every one of us why the woman who saved our lives is being punished for it. You abandoned us." "She didn't." The crowd erupted in agreement. Their voices rose like thunder, a chorus of men who had stared death in the eye and returned only because of her. The general's jaw clenched. He ordered them dispersed, but the Marines didn't move. They stood their ground, silent, their presence louder than any argument. The standoff grew beyond the base. Journalists caught wind of the rescue, piecing together fragments of radio chatter, eyewitness accounts, and leaks from sympathetic officers. The story raced across the wires. 542 Marines abandoned. One pilot defied orders. All survived. Public opinion exploded. Families of the rescued Marines flooded the Pentagon with calls and letters. News anchors called her the Angel of the Valley. Editorials questioned the morality of a military that punished salvation. Suddenly, the Pentagon found itself in a war it hadn't anticipated, not on the battlefield, but in the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, Mitchell sat confined in a small quarters, stripped of flight privileges, awaiting judgment. She passed the hours staring at the walls, a silence louder than any explosion. She had no regrets, but that didn't mean she was immune to doubt. Had she doomed her career? Would she be remembered not as a savior, but as a traitor to discipline? Her thoughts were broken by a knock at the door. Daniels entered, flanked by several Marines. They stood at attention, their battered forms rigid, their eyes blazing. "Ma'am," Daniels said, his voice firm, "we've decided something. If they court-martial you, they'll have to court-martial us too. Because we're guilty of the same thing, surviving when protocol said we shouldn't." Mitchell's throat tightened. For the first time since it began, she fought back tears. She saluted them, and they saluted back. In that moment, rank, protocol, and punishment meant nothing. Only loyalty remained. Pressure mounted. The Pentagon convened a special tribunal, but their hands were tied. To condemn Mitchell publicly risked alienating not only the Marines she saved, but also the families, the public, and the media now watching every move. Behind closed doors, debates raged. Some generals fumed that letting her off would set a dangerous precedent. Others argued punishing her would destroy morale. The weight of 542 lives pressed against every argument. Finally, a compromise emerged. Weeks later, Mitchell was called back into the same tent where she had once stood accused. The general faced her again, his expression unreadable. "Captain Sarah Mitchell," he said, voice clipped, "this tribunal finds you guilty of insubordination and reckless conduct. However, in light of the extraordinary circumstances, the outcome of your actions, and the overwhelming testimony of those whose lives you saved, this court recommends immediate reinstatement. The record of this case will be sealed. Effective immediately, you are returned to active duty." The words hung heavy. She was technically guilty, yet paradoxically absolved. Neither condemned nor fully exonerated. A soldier's limbo. Mitchell saluted, her face calm, though inside her heart thundered. She had expected punishment. She had not expected this. When she stepped outside, Daniels and hundreds of Marines stood waiting. The moment they saw her, they erupted into cheers, voices echoing across the base. Mitchell froze, overwhelmed, before Daniels pushed through the crowd and clasped her hand. "They tried to break you," he said, his voice steady. "But you're unbreakable. You're ours. And we'll never forget." For the first time since the Valley, Sarah Mitchell allowed herself to smile without restraint. The war wasn't over. Her career wasn't safe. But she had done what mattered. She had proven that one person, armed with courage, could defy an entire system and win. And somewhere deep down, she knew this was not just her defining moment. It was theirs. History has a way of carving legends from flesh and bone. For the 542 Marines who staggered out of the valley alive, Captain Sarah Mitchell was more than a pilot. She was the line between existence and oblivion, the living proof that courage could outweigh protocol. But for Mitchell herself, the days that followed were not gilded with glory. They were heavy, complicated, and filled with questions about what her defiance truly meant. In the weeks after her tribunal, Mitchell returned to flying. The Iron Angel was retired to a hangar, her battered fuselage patched but left scarred, a testament to the 7 impossible runs she had endured. Pilots who passed her touched the frame like a relic. Mechanics joked that the bird had more lives than a cat. But everyone knew the truth. It wasn't the machine that had saved the Marines. It was the woman in the cockpit. Mitchell flew again, but something in her had shifted. Missions that once felt like routine now seemed smaller, quieter. Each time she lifted off, she wondered if anything she did could ever matter as much as those frantic days in the valley. She told herself it didn't matter. She hadn't flown for medals or recognition. She had flown because no one else would. Still, the weight of it never fully left her. Back home, the story exploded. Newspapers dubbed her the Angel of 542. News anchors ran segments detailing every flight, every bullet dodged, every Marine carried back. Families sent letters that stacked high on her bunk. Mothers thanking her for sons returned. Children drawing crayon pictures of helicopters with angel wings. Fathers writing shaky lines about tears they hadn't shed in decades. Mitchell read them all. Some made her smile. Some made her cry. One letter, from the wife of a Marine who had been too wounded to walk, but was dragged aboard on the 5th run, stayed with her forever. You don't know me, but you saved my husband. He is alive to hold our daughter, because of you. When she asks me about heroes, I will tell her about Captain Sarah Mitchell. I will tell her the heroes are not the ones who follow the rules, but the ones who follow their hearts. Mitchell folded that letter carefully and tucked it into her flight jacket. She carried it with her on every mission afterward. But not all reactions were praise. Within the higher echelons of the military, her actions remained controversial. Some officers whispered that she had undermined discipline, that her defiance set a dangerous precedent. What happens, they asked, if every soldier decides which orders to follow? Others countered that rules exist to serve life, not the other way around. What happens, they asked, if every soldier lets men die just to keep their record clean? Mitchell never joined those debates. She said little in public, gave no interviews, offered no grand speeches. When reporters pressed her, she answered only, "I did what I had to do." That silence only deepened her legend. Among the Marines she saved, loyalty hardened into something deeper. They called themselves Mitchell's 542. They formed a bond that lasted long after the war. Every year, on the anniversary of the rescue, they gathered, scarred, grayer, some walking with canes, some missing limbs, and raised a toast to the woman who gave them a second life. At the first gathering, Daniel spoke. His voice was rough, his body worn, but his eyes shone. Most of us shouldn't be here. We should have died in that pit, but she wouldn't let us. She didn't see numbers, or protocols, or risks. She saw us, flesh and blood, brothers. And she said, no, not today, not these men. That's why we're still breathing. Mitchell attended that first gathering quietly, sitting at the back, her glass raised, but her head bowed. When they cheered her name, she shook her head. You saved each other, she told them. But they only laughed. We're just stubborn Marines. You're the reason we had a chance. Years later, military academies studied her case. Cadets debated it in classrooms. Was she reckless or righteous? Professors asked whether her defiance strengthened the military or weakened it. Textbooks framed her flights as a critical incident in modern military ethics. But among the rank and file, there was no debate. Mitchell was proof that the soul of a soldier wasn't measured in medals or orders followed, but in the lives saved when everything seemed lost. Pilots whispered her name before missions, a talisman against fear. Infantrymen painted Angel on helmets and Humvees. Young recruits told stories they had heard from older brothers, uncles, fathers, stories of a lone helicopter swooping through fire, of a woman who broke every rule to bring them home. Her legend outgrew the controversy. Mitchell herself aged quietly. She never sought higher rank, never pushed for glory. She continued to fly until her body told her she couldn't anymore. Then she taught, not tactics, not manuals, but instinct. In her first lecture to a room of cadets, she didn't talk about the tribunal, or the politics, or even the danger. She spoke of the voices on the radio, the crack in a Marine's voice when he realized he wasn't abandoned. You will learn to fly machines, she told them. But never forget, you're carrying lives. Each dot on your radar, each voice on your headset, each man or woman waiting for you to show up, that's the weight you carry. Machines can be replaced. Lives cannot. Remember that when you're forced to choose between orders and humanity, the cadets were silent. Some scribbled notes. Others simply stared. But every one of them knew they were hearing something not found in manuals. On the 20th anniversary of the rescue, a memorial was unveiled. A bronze statue stood outside the Marine Corps Museum, not of Mitchell, but of a helicopter lifting from rubble, its ramp overflowing with Marines. Beneath it, the inscription read, "To those who were not abandoned, to the one who would not leave them." Mitchell stood in the crowd, her hair streaked with gray, her face lined with years, but her eyes still sharp. Daniels, older now, with a cane and a scar that pulled at his cheek, stood beside her. He nudged her with his elbow. "They tried to make it about all of us," he said. "But we know the truth. That's you up there." Mitchell shook her head softly. "No, that's us. Every last one who refused to quit." Daniels smiled, but his eyes were wet. "Maybe, but without you, none of us would have lived long enough to argue about it." As the crowd dispersed, Mitchell lingered at the statue. She touched the bronze ramp, cold beneath her fingertips, and for a moment she was back in the pit. Dust choking the air, bullets ripping the sky, men screaming for salvation. She heard her father's voice again, steady and unyielding, no hesitation, no regret. And she realized something she had never fully allowed herself to believe. It wasn't the rules she had broken that defined her. It was the lives she had saved. History would debate her. Officers would argue over her precedent. Books would be written. Films would be made. Cadets would study her choices for decades. But for the men who had been there, for the families who held them close, for the child who grew up knowing her father only because of a lone pilot who refused to wait, the truth was simpler. Captain Sarah Mitchell had not just flown a helicopter into hell. She had flown into history.